So we're going to move on to the cons and the disadvantages. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, excuse me. I just wanted to say the one thing I'm not sure if you covered is the speed of transactions. The Bitcoin and cryptocurrency transactions in general are like so much faster than banking. You don't sit and wait for pending transactions. It's a lot different than banking in that respect. So you can definitely, if, like you said, if you're transacting with, if a father son are transacting, they get the money immediately, not having to wait for the banks to process that. And the transactions are getting faster. They're trying to make them faster too. So I thought that was that's a real benefit that I hate waiting for pending transactions. So.
Right, and you are correct. Part of the reason I didn't list it in the pros is that
okay.
the issue is not 100% solved.
Okay.
So, and I can give you a good example of this. You can wait 30 minutes to an hour for transactions to go through, depending on the amount and that kind of thing. I'm not.
Yeah, that's true.
But you know, this is being solved by the Lightning Network and other additions and other upgrades to the Bitcoin network to basically be able to transact at the speed of light. You know, we're talking seconds.
I apologize for.
Oh no, it's okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, but you are right that Bitcoin transaction speeds are very fast, especially when you compare it to like a bank wire, right? You know, say you were sending, you know, $5,000 to your cousin who lived in, you know, Argentina, right? If you did a bank wire, that can take like 3 days, 3 to 5 days sometimes. And with Bitcoin, you could do it in, you know, less than 30 minutes, and depending on how fast the transaction goes through. So you're absolutely right that sometimes, depending on the transaction type, Bitcoin absolutely has the advantage for speed. Now, and I'll go into the con, you know, of the disadvantages of that. But the Lightning Network is solving that issue, and I'm actually participating in the Lightning Network right now. I have a channel so people can send Bitcoin through my node to another node very quickly, and it's very fast. It's very interesting too. So that issue is being solved, and it's really a matter of time before you know, Bitcoin transactions are extremely fast. So we'll move on to the cons and the disadvantages. The first one is the volatility of Bitcoin. It is, some consider it a risky investment because of the extreme price movements. You know, one day it can be worth 35,000. The next day it could be worth 30,000 or 60,000. You know, all these different things, and it fluctuates a lot. It can be, you know, a couple thousand or just a couple $100. It just really depends on the market and the demand, and the news moves a lot of the price quite often. So this volatility, to some, is seen as a disadvantage because it's hard to predict the price, and you could lose money on the downside, but on the upside you could make money. So, but it's just the volatility and the potential risk with that is a disadvantage to some. The next thing is that you can't use Bitcoin transactions for everyday purchases. Many businesses don't accept Bitcoin. And I have 2 crypto debit cards, and I have 2 more on the way. And so I will be able to spend and buy and purchase using Bitcoin. And this is, it's been around for a little while, but it's not mainstream yet. And so I can, purchase with Bitcoin. It's through the, like a Visa or MasterCard card, but still, if you were to transact, just using Bitcoin, a wallet, that type of thing, many businesses don't accept that. And like, you can't buy a house with Bitcoin, at least not that. I did hear a story about somebody buying a bar with Bitcoin in New York, I believe. But those types of transactions are very few and far between. And so typically they can't really be used for everyday transactions. Another disadvantage is the variable transaction fee. And this is based on a couple of different things. The first is the network demand. So if there are a lot of transactions going through, typically the price will be a little bit higher. It also depends on the number of nodes and miners. And if you're sending across the current Bitcoin network, or if you're sending through the Lightning network, these fees can vary. You can pay a couple cents to a couple dollars, and it typically ranges based on how much Bitcoin you're sending, or just that specific block that your transaction ends up in. So with the variable fees, it's hard to predict, first of all, but then second, the disadvantage is that, like a debit card, it doesn't have any fees that the customer sees, right? The banks pay the fees, the merchants pay the fees, right? So a merchant would pay somewhere between 1% and 3% to accept a debit card or a credit card. But the customer doesn't see that. So if you were to send Bitcoin, you do see that fee, and it comes out of your transaction. And so it's baked in there, but you do see it. So that is a current, I would say, disadvantage, just because sometimes you can pay a lot just to send even a small amount. It just really depends day to day. Another disadvantage is that Bitcoin has no company, business, or backing asset that holds value apart from the market demand and supply. So Bitcoin's value is derived solely from the market demand and supply, and who's buying, who's selling, how many people own, that type of thing. And so that's part of the reason why Bitcoin is so volatile, is that if nobody's buying Bitcoin, then the price could go down. It just really depends on who's buying, who's selling, and when they're buying and selling, and how much demand there is for it. So it's, to some, it may seem like more of a risk to invest, as opposed to, say, something like real estate, that is more of a secure form of store of value, that when you purchase that, when you have the deed to a piece of real estate, that deed has a backing asset of the land, right? Whereas Bitcoin, it doesn't technically have any backing asset. And so some do criticize that about Bitcoin. Another con is the usage by criminals because of the semi-anonymous nature of Bitcoin. And the fact that many associate Bitcoin with illegal activity. And this derives from a few different things. One mostly being the old dark web Silk Road, which was basically an internet black market exchange where people would buy contraband, illegal firearms, and drugs, and all kinds of things using Bitcoin, because it was fairly anonymous at that point, and you didn't have to perform identity checks either. So nowadays, and this market was shut down by the FBI, but it got a lot of notoriety. Bitcoin got a lot of, I would say, negative press because of that, and it was viewed as, oh, well, only criminals use Bitcoin. Now, that's actually not the truth. The real truth is that less than 10%, I think it's less than 5% of the entire network is potentially criminal activity. I need to look in the numbers a little bit more, but those are the facts that I've found so far. So as far as this negative light, I would say that would be could be viewed as a disadvantage to Bitcoin, because there could be some negative connotations with that. Along with those connotations, there are many different hacks and scams. And when I say hacks, I'm not talking about the network. I'm talking about people hacking personal Bitcoin wallets or centralized exchange. So, crypto exchanges have and host many different cryptocurrencies and vast amounts, millions, hundreds of millions, sometimes even more. And so many of them have been hacked, and the funds, the crypto funds, the Bitcoin, the other forms of cryptocurrency have been stolen. And because of the nature of Bitcoin, they can be, it's fairly anonymous. It's hard to tell who actually got it sometimes. And then there are also scams. So if you were to give away your private keys, which are the digital keys to your safety deposit box, then somebody can empty your wallet, right? And somebody can steal your Bitcoin or your money. And so I would, some view this as if some users are uninformed about security, giving away these private keys, or if they're not careful with these, then there's, your Bitcoin can be stolen. And there are a lot of scams out there that can trick you into, giving up your password or your private keys or your PIN, and some of these things, if they get enough of them, they can break in. So those are just things to be aware of, and I would consider it a disadvantage, just because of it's criminals find it much easier to hack and scam for Bitcoin than they would to rob a bank, right? They can do everything online, whereas they'd have to go in person. Not all the time, like if you were to rob a bank in person, or maybe they could steal it online, but the success rate is higher when you're going after individuals with Bitcoin. So another potential disadvantage is the anonymous creator, right? And how can we trust a system if we don't know the identity of the creator? And so there is some mistrust out there. But I think that, over the last decade, I think Bitcoin has proved itself in the fact that it's never been hacked. So regardless of if it was one person or a group of people, I think that the anonymous creator or creators, they wanted to remain anonymous, and maybe that was their choice. But it's hard to say. And so the potential disadvantage is that, some people may view Bitcoin as, how can I trust this if I don't know who created it, right? Typically if there's a product, there's typically a company or a CEO behind whoever created that, right? And they buy into the company, they buy into the CEO, they buy into the product. It's hard to do that with Bitcoin because you don't know who created it. And so there's kind of this anonymity and mystery to it. It could be viewed as a disadvantage. Another thing is the relatively new, Bitcoin's a very new financial medium and store of value where people exchange. And, it has been around for a decade, but Bitcoin does not have mass institutional adoption, mass public adoption yet. And so it's still early days. It's hard to tell whether it's going to fully catch on or not. So some could view this as a potential disadvantage because, Bitcoin, say there's something else that came around that's better than Bitcoin and everybody wanted to be a part of that, then Bitcoin could lose its value. It's possible. Anything's possible. So, the fact that it's newer, it's been around for a decade, more than a decade. It still has to prove itself over time. It's done a heck of a job so far. And what that comes with that, there are very few adopters, compared to the traditional financial market, so the stock market, banks, the, credit card companies, the, PayPal, Venmo, all these different things. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of users, right? Billions of users, really, if you think about it. I mean, yeah, with all the banks and different types of banks around the world. But with Bitcoin specifically, and other cryptocurrencies too, it's a very small market share. It's a very small population that actually own Bitcoin. And it has not reached mass adoption. And it's still, could be viewed as a risky investment because so few people, actually are participating in this network, in this currency, in this financial system. So moving on, another disadvantage of Bitcoin is that the underlying technology is difficult to understand. And honestly, I was confused at first. And I'm a tech guy. Like, I love hardware, I love software, I code, all this type of stuff. And it threw me for a loop. It's complicated. And there are many different pieces, there are many different parts. And, there's crypto, there's blockchain, there's mining, there's nodes, there's hashing and all, Merkle tree root and all these different things that go into it. And it's very complicated. And I think that the disadvantage here is that if you don't understand it, how can I invest in it? How can I use it? And that kind of goes with the same disadvantage with who created it, right? If I don't know who created it and I don't understand it, why would I invest in it? So that could be viewed as a disadvantage for some. Another thing is the ease of use. And I mentioned this in the pros, there are certain applications that are very easy to use, but there are many platforms that are not. many exchanges. There are some mobile apps that really aren't that easy to use. There are decentralized exchanges. There are other platforms that are really not, and so Bitcoin isn't user friendly to all across every single platform. So there is an ease of use, I would say, some kind of disadvantage there, depending on the platform you're using. And then, also what comes with that is that it can be, difficult to purchase. It can be difficult to sell. And the same thing goes with owning and storing Bitcoin. There are apps that make it very easy. But if you were to store it and maintain full control and have your own private keys, it's a higher, it goes on to the next point. It's a higher level. You have to have a higher level of personal financial responsibility. You are in control of your bank account, right? Fully. Nobody else has access except for you, if you were to store it in that way. So, and I can tell you from experience, storing in many different cold storage wallets, non-custodial wallets, hardware wallets, it can be complicated. And it's not very easy to use. And if you don't know what you're doing, you could lose your Bitcoin. If you sent it to the wrong address, or if you mistyped a number, or you could just lose it. Or if you forget your password, if it's locked up in a hardware wallet and you forget your password, you can't phone a company and say, hey, I lost my password. Like, that doesn't, it's not in many of these higher level hardware security ways to store Bitcoin are kind of irrecoverable. There was a guy that I read about who, I believe it's either $7 or $10 million in Bitcoin. And he forgot the password to his hardware wallet. And he's used, I believe, 8 out of 10 attempts to recover. And the wallet will erase itself on the 10th incorrect attempt to access. If he types in 2 more, then he'll lose it forever. And so, things like this, Bitcoin can be very difficult to manage. If you were to store and hold your own private keys to hold, to secure, and it comes with some caveats, and some of it can be difficult, some of it can be easy. So, like we were talking about before, the transaction speeds can be fast. They can also be slow. And I've seen transactions take more than 30 minutes. They can be sometimes an hour. I'd have to do a little bit more research into that, but they may be even more than an hour sometimes. But it just really depends on the network demand, the fees, how much you're paying, because you can pay extra in fees to jump the line, to get your transaction ahead of somebody else's. And this issue is being addressed by the Lightning Network, but it's not fully implemented yet. And transactions still remain slower. There are other cryptocurrencies that I've sent and transacted with, and I can send them in 5 seconds flat, and have confirmation on the other end, and done. And so that's the future of Bitcoin. That is what the Lightning Network does, but it is not not every transaction is running through the Lightning Network currently. So it can take some time. But on the flip side, 30 minutes is nothing compared to 3 to 5 days if you're sending a bank wire. So, I guess it depends on the type of transaction and the wait time associated with that transaction. So Bitcoin can be fast, it can be slow, depending on the circumstance. The next thing is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the industry phrase is FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it's about the future of Bitcoin and whether the price is going to remain, go up, down, if it's going to crash or skyrocket, or and a lot of this is based on the media, so news, legislation, lawsuits, new exchanges, new coins, all kinds of different things. And so, and new updates to the network, that type of thing. And there is a lot of uncertainty. No one really knows no one can predict the future. It's possible that Bitcoin could become a competitor to gold, if it reaches a $10 trillion market cap. That's quite a ways. But we were at over $1 trillion, just earlier this year. So anything's possible. But, I think to get there, there's going to have to be mass institutional adoption, mass public adoption. We're talking hundreds of millions of people using Bitcoin in some way, shape, or form. So, with that uncertainty and doubt, part of that is that Bitcoin is largely unregulated. And there are some laws and regulations currently, but a lot of them are still being drafted. They're still being written, reviewed, because Bitcoin is a new asset class. It's deflationary. It's digital, and the current SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission law doesn't provide any regulatory clarity on whether or not Bitcoin is a quote unquote security. And a security is a stock, a bond, trying to think of other examples, like real estate, a car, like any type of store of value that actually has, and basically, Bitcoin, at least as of right now, is not considered a security because of the legislation that was written. I believe it was back in the 1920s. So it's hard to say whether or not Bitcoin is going to be a security or is it going to be some other new class. And so there's a lot of legislation coming out or that's pending, that's upcoming. And so, this unregulated nature, it keeps many retail investors on the sidelines. So this could be seen as a disadvantage. And it's a potential risk. If it's unregulated, then it's risky, right? At least to some. And so, part of that is the small global market cap, and right now it's 500 billion, right around there. When you compare that to the gold market, we're talking around $10 trillion. But if you look at all the other different types of securities, we're talking banking, real estate, like all these different things, we're talking of, hundreds of, just astronomical amounts more than $1 trillion. We're talking hundreds of trillions, or, 50 trillion, or I'd have to look into some numbers, but, Bitcoin is very, very small when compared to gold, when compared to stocks, the stock market, that type, like securities market, that type of thing. And so, because of this, it could be viewed as a disadvantage because it's so small. there's not mass adoption, so why should I invest in it? Could be viewed like that to some.